Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and I have some tutorials on .NET 8 and working with Blazor, but they're made for my students in my entry-level course. So I thought I'd do one that was really focused more on if you already know how to code in .NET, um, what are the changes with .NET 8? At least the main fundamental ones. So I'm going to start a new project, and I think probably the easiest way is I'll just do some kind of a to-do app, and we'll start with so if you look at the options now, if you're up to .NET 8. Put C# in, you're going to find, let's see, what do I want? All project types. There's now a Blazor web app, a WebAssembly standalone app, and a server app is still there. It might still be there. Really, the one you kind of want to be working with for the most part is this Blazor web app. This standalone app is useful when you're just making a front end, kind of a SPA, single page application. You might want to use this. Or if you're maybe making a static web app, you could use this and it'll just do the front end piece. If you want a server backend and a database and everything else and some identity, this is the app you want. There's also .NET Aspire. I'm not going to include that, but that was another thing that was brought into .NET 8 that's really cool. But for this demo, I'm just going to focus on the Blazor web app. So I'm going to call this to do. I'm going to put it in my repos. .NET 8 long-term support. 9 will be coming out shortly, within a few months. This is the current version, and this will be, of course, supported for 2 years. The odd number version 9 will be supported for 1 year. I'm going to add individual accounts. This is going to give us a SQL Server database, and I'm going to configure for HTTPS. There's several interactive render modes you can pick here. None, which is a very static website. Server, where all the interactions are server-based interactions, a little bit like MVC, if you're familiar with MVC. WebAssembly, which would be all front-end interactivity, where all the client code is basically in the front end of the application. And then auto, where we're going to be able to mix these different modalities all in the same application. So we're going to pick auto. And I believe that this is kind of going to be the default way that people are going to build it. They're going to pick this because you can pick and choose by page what you want. And so it becomes easier to integrate, some front end functionality versus some server side functionality and combine it with auto. And then the interactivity location. Well, if you're doing auto and you're doing it by page, it makes sense to make it per page. If you set it to be global, you kind of have to set the state for the entire site. So that kind of defeats the purpose of auto, I think. So I'm going to make it per page and component. I'm going to include the sample pages. Once you become familiar with how this works, you probably get rid of the sample pages. I'm going to check off do not use top level statements feature. I'll just add the word feature here. This is kind of confusing. It's that if you check off do not use top level statements, that means you're not using the top level statement feature, and the top level statement feature involves not having top level statements. So there's kind of an implicit double negative in here. If you want to see all the namespace things, put the checkbox. If you don't want to see that stuff and you want to have a little simpler view, remove that, but then you have to know what's going on. So I'm just going to leave that enabled so we can see the namespaces. And then Aspire has been added here. There's This provides some ability to get metrics on your site once it's deployed. I'm going to not do that for this purposes of this demonstration. So I'm going to create this and let it build. And you get two little intro pages, and that's because this template as built here, as we selected here, actually made two projects. This one just says to do, and this is the one that says to do.client. So with Blazor, we have essentially we get two projects. One is a server-side project, which is the first one, and the other is the WebAssembly project, the front-end project, which is this .client project. I'm going to close these. And let's just run it first just to see what it looks like. So right out of the box, you get a nice looking website. It gives you a counter. This is actually a WebAssembly page, which is running on using C# and WebAssembly in the browser. This is a server-side page, which is using C# and using C# for the front end, but is being rendered on the server. And then there's a demonstration of authentication, which is kind of the old authentication service, except for one thing. The previous authentication approach for Blazor used to be done using Razor pages, or not Razor pages, using basically MVC. They've ported all of that to Blazor. So now the components of your identity are also Blazor pages. So this integrates a lot better than it did in .NET 6 and 7. This is all now Blazor components. And whereas before you had to scaffold components to bring these in, they just put them right in the template. So all your identity stuff is here ready for you to modify. And it makes sense because you pretty much have to modify all these components anyway. One, to add your email functionality, and then two, to when you register, there's some pieces in here which are just placeholders that you need to customize at some point. So they put the functionality in Razor pages right in your components folder here, and it's under this folder called accounts. So that's really nice. So the walkthrough of the structure, basically what you have is everything starts with program.cs. Program.cs is a console app. It starts with main. And in here, you have a builder that you configure, and then that builder, you perform a build operation to get your app, and then you run your app. So those three steps there are really the minimal things to get a Kestrel server up and running to run your application. And that's what actually makes your website. So it used to be there's a startup.cs, and there's this, in program.cs it said use the startup class, and then you went to the startup class. They got rid of that. I think they got rid of that in .NET 6. And now all your configuration for your site is in here. You have some standard configuration things to add your Razor components. And here you can see we're adding Razor components, interactive server components, and WebAssembly components. So what's that about? Well, if you go to Learn and look up Blazor render modes, they have an article here on the render modes. And there's three, or there's, well, actually, yeah, there's these four render modes. There's static server, which static server-side rendering is kind of just your static page. That's when you render things that way. You know, this would be, for example, an about page would be a logical thing to render as a static page. You're not expecting any interactivity. You're not expected to execute any code on this. You're just providing some HTML elements for the user to see. Then we have interactive server. With interactive server, the way this works, let's see if I have those images here. Nope. If you go look at hosting models on here, you'll bring up these images. And so this is the Blazor server hosting model. On the right, we have our browser, the user. And when they send the when they send a request from their browser, if you're in server-side interactivity mode, what happens is Blazor will get that request. They will render the page on here. And if it's the first render, they just send it like a normal page to the client. On subsequent events, when the user clicks on buttons or you have code which is responding to events, that what ends up happening is a signal, the request to change is sent over signal R to the server. The server takes that information that a button's been clicked or that a value's been changed in a text box and re-renders the page on the server, makes a diff and sends the diff to the browser to update the page. And so with Blazor server, you have to have a signal R connection maintained all the time. In fact, sometimes you'll see this connection drop and you'll see a little message that said lost connection to the server, and then reconnected, and then it starts up again. So the disadvantage of using server-side rendering is that you're tying up your server a lot, and you have to maintain a signal R connection to every client which is working with your server at one time. So generally speaking, this is a scenario where you wouldn't want to do this if you were, say, a line of business application which is working with, or if you're a retail application that's working with customers throughout the world, maybe this is not the best option for that. But if you're concerned about security, this is much more secure than we're going to see with the WebAssembly approach, because you're behind the firewall with the server. All the code that's executing is not available to the user. And so this is the more secure but more resource-intensive approach. And to access it, we would use interactive server render mode. The other render mode that they have is interactive WebAssembly. And interactive WebAssembly leverages the WebAssembly mode. And in this, the server sends the page with all the code in WebAssembly to the browser, and from that point on, all the interactivity, all the code's running in the user's browser. Of course, this has the key issue with single page applications, that all the code's there. So the user has access to everything. Even though it's in WebAssembly, it's kind of obscured, but you can decompile anything. So you have to assume that any code you send that way, they can completely decompile and they can do anything they want with. And that's okay as long as you secure things from a web API end. So anything secure that needs to happen has to happen in a web API, and you have to assume that the code that you send forward is essentially suspect and could be leveraged to do bad things to your site. So as long as you follow those security practices, this is fine. And the advantage is that if you use Blazor WebAssembly, you're offloading all of the processing to the browser. And so this is the preferred mode when you have a lot of users and you want to offload that work. And to use that, you would use interactive WebAssembly. We'll see how that works later. And then we have interactive auto, and this actually combines all of this. And so with interactive auto, it starts off by sending a static server page. And then it, as soon as the server is up and running, it serves the page using the server. And then as soon as in the background, it downloads the WASM page. Once the WASM page is downloaded, it then switches control over to the WASM page. And you might be wondering, well, why do you want to do this? Well, this gives you kind of the best of all worlds. The static server page is the fastest. And if you're concerned about search engine optimization, these interactive modes are not great for search engine optimization. Those search engines don't necessarily see the stuff that they do. So getting that static server page out right away and optimizing it for SEO gives you that advantage. And then when these pages come in, you get all the utility of interactivity. The server page can be up and functional quicker. And then finally, you can offload the work. And so while the server page uses up server resources, you're using it up for a minimum amount of time while the interactive page flows to the front end. And so with auto, we have to do, it's really cool, but you have to do quite a bit of work to get all these transitions to work seamlessly in such a way that it doesn't look awkward, because you can have things kind of appear and disappear if you don't do it right. So those are the main differences between the render modes. So given that, let's see what we can do with this. We have this page, and I think the first thing to look at is is this component, or the components that are on here, and how the page is put together. So our program.cs adds these three services to serve those render modes. And then here we have services that are added to handle all of our authentication. And if you've done anything with authentication with .NET before, this should look relatively familiar. We get a connection string. That connection string, as usual with the templates, stores the connection in the app settings. By the way, this connection string is relatively safe because it uses a trusted connection. If you have a connection string which has passwords and user IDs, generally it's best to right-click here and use the manage secrets and put your secrets in this secrets.json file, which is not located inside of your project. It's located on your hard drive, and that keeps your secrets with passwords out of the network. So keep your secret secret. But you get a connection string. You add a DB context. It by default uses SQL Server, local DB. Note if you're doing this on a Mac or Linux machine, and you're using Visual Studio Code, and you use the CLI to build your templates there, it will use SQLite. You get and then some more identity stuff, and then here they've put a placeholder for your email application, and so they use identity no-op email sender. This is the thing that when you log in initially with identity, it doesn't really send an email. I'm going to have an article on how to configure email for your application. But it's essentially the same way as if you've ever done this before, that you did it with previous applications. but that's where your email sender gets configured. And then once you have all these services added, then you can build your application. By the way, in here is typically where we will also be adding our data services. We'll see that probably later. So typically you would add those here. The app gets built. There's some app configuration steps here that are done once the configuration is built. You have different error messages being sent depending on whether you're in development or you're deployed, some security stuff. This use static files is what allows us, of course, to access files that are stored in the www root folder if we want the user to be able to, upload and download files from our web application. Here we're mapping, again, some more things for WebAssembly, interactive server, render modes, some more identity endpoints, and then your app is running, and that brings up, let's see, I think this is it actually. Yes, it'll bring up this console, running, and that's actually your web server running as a console application. So yes, at this point, our Blazor application is just a console application. So that gets our page started. And then how is a page built? Well, I'm going to start at the top of the stack of the page. App.Razor is now where the very top of our page is. So here you can see the head block, the body block, and there's a head outlet component. This is a Blazor component. You can see these things that are not HTML. That's because these are actually Razor components, these are ones provided by the framework. We'll see how the head outlet works later. That allows you, if you want to change the title or you want to put some things in the head block from our pages, they give you this. And then you have a routes component, and that's this component here. So this is these are all Razor components, app.Razor, and then if we look at routes.Razor, this gets crammed into this when the page gets built. And if you look at your routes, this is primarily used to navigate from one page to the next. We'll see how routing works in a little bit when we look at the pages. But essentially, when the URL request comes in, this figures out which one of your pages is going to be in here is going to be displayed. And actually, perhaps it'd be easiest to show that here. For example, if I look at this weather page, you'll see this @page directive. This sets the route to get to the weather page. And if I run this, if I go to weather, you see it says /weather. So that route ends up being this part of the URL. And what is governing how that works is through this router component. And you can see here we have, it displays, this is what it displays if it's found. If it's not found, it basically gives you an error. You could actually, I believe, put in here not found, and you could tell it could not find your page. Sorry. And let's see if I did that right. If I put blah, nope, something else has to be done to do that. I think it intercepts I think the 404 error intercepts before you get to this not found element. But if it's found, then it applies this authorized route view. That's what starts driving your authentication. And so if you have a page that requires authentication and you aren't authenticated, this will actually redirect you to the login page. So we saw how when I clicked on the authorization required page, it drove me right to the login. That's what's doing that. So now you can see here, let's see, where is it? Routing, not authorized. Default layout, type of layout, main layout. Well, that's actually over here. So this gets placed into here, which gets placed into, and this gets connected into here. So you can see how all of this is building on top of everything else. So if we go to the main layout, it inherits from a component base provided by the framework. And what you have here is this div with a nav menu and an at body. And here we can see we have a top row class. Well, it's probably easiest to just bring up a page and point to things. So that nav menu, that's this right here. And it's done as a sidebar that's being floated left. This anchor tag that says about, that's that one right here. And so basically this div that's styled top row is this top row here. And then this add body directive just does this part. Now, there's nothing sacred about this format. You can change it, and typically probably should, to match whatever styling you want. But you need to know what these things are in order to be able to rework with this. So a common thing I've done is I will go find a template for a Bootstrap site that I kind of like, and I'll use that and take those free templates to kind of figure out how to re-record that. And I think I had a blog entry on how to do that for 7. I'll probably update it for 8 and have show how to restyle the site extensively at a later point. But yeah, this is where you would start interacting with that, was with the layout. This is how you would start setting up the page to be something other than what this looks like. Although it's a nice layout, we probably don't want all of our pages to look exactly the same. And so that main layout has this at body. This at body is where these pages show up. So in this weather page, all this stuff ends up getting put into the main layout right here. And this nav menu, that's this. This is where your links are, and you can see that they're using a standard Bootstrap nav. There's your navbar brand, your top, your classes for styling, your your navigation page, and then you can see all of these are these nav links. Those are also components, and these end up rendering as anchor tags. So if I inspect this, I'm going to see that that ends up becoming an anchor tag, but it's defined here as a Blazor nav link component. And those components are really just kind of convenience components. You could do them as anchor tags, that would be fine, but they provide you some functionality. And then here you can see that what they've done is they put a span in here. That span is actually bringing in an icon, a Bootstrap icon. And if you're wondering where those icons are, if you go look at your app Razor page, you won't find a link bringing in an icon library. What they did instead is they've set this up so that they have CSS pages which belong just to the page. So if you look at the CSS page for nav menu, they actually copied them in here. So that's where these are. So if you want to bring in more icons, you could bring in the images. I generally just bring in a icon library, put it into app.razor here, and then start using that instead of these. So a lot of this stuff really is just meant to be placeholders, but it works, and there's no reason you couldn't continue using it that way. But I think an icon library maybe is a little bit more practical. So that's your nav links. This is a Bootstrap styled nav. You have this authorized view. This is actually where the login functionality is, and you have authorized and not authorized. So if you're not logged in, it's showing this stuff, which gives you the chance to log in. And if you are logged in, it tells you who you are, in case you didn't know. And then it gives you the chance to go through and modify your profile. Okay, so that's the basic way these pages are structured. And how do we create a page? So let me just go ahead and add a we'll do a static page first. So if I run this, and this About page is currently going to Microsoft's page. It's a great page, but it'd be really cool to have our own About page. So what I'm going to do is go to Page, Add New Razor Component, and I'm going to create an About page. And I like putting the word page on things that are going to be routed to, and they're going to have a page. So I put the word About page. I'll name this About page. Get rid of the word page there, but it'll be there in this name. Your names of your components have to be capitalized. They have to be Pascal cased. And so since this is a top level page, we're going to put an @page directive. And we're going to put the route. So I'm just going to use About. And let's see, let me grab some lorem ipsum. And so there we have a beautiful page with some amazing prose talking about our organization. Put an About in. So if I put that route, it takes me to that page. So that gives me the page. Now I want to be able to add a link to that. So usually the easiest way is just grab an existing link, figure out where you want to put it, change the href to that link, and change the name of this. And now we can go to our About page. So we could do the link there, or if we wanted this one to be used for it, which would probably make sense since maybe that would be where we'd want it, I could not have it here, and I could go to the About. I could go to the main layout, and we see that there's that link here that goes to About. I could just replace this with /about, believe that's correct. Let's see if this works. And now that about is going to the about page that I created. So either way, you can either use an anchor tag and just put your route in the anchor tag and it'll take you there, or you can use the nav menu and the nav links. And you can put those don't have to be in the nav menu. You can put those anywhere and it'll make an anchor tag for you. So that's the main way of creating navigation in your site. So that is, congratulations, that's how you make a this first one, a static server-side rendering page, because the default for a Blazor component is to render statically. And let's say that we wanted to make a to-do page. And so I'm going to add a Blazor component, and we will let's make one that just creates a to-do. To-do page. And on this page, we let's just start off. We need a to-do. So where do we put we want a model class for these to-dos. So I would generally put them right here. I would actually make a new project here. Oh. And we're going to want the C#, and we're going to want it to be a library project. I'm just going to make a regular class library in C#. And I'm going to call this entities. How about that? Do all the domain stuff kind of things here. And so I'm going to get rid of that class and add a folder for models. And you want you want your model class to actually be in a project outside of the server side and outside the client, because these are most likely going to be sharing these to pass these back and forth. And later on, you may have a web API on your server, and you want that shared thing. So that's why we're going to make this in a separate library. I'm going to create a class called to-do. I don't know why it still defaults to internal, but and actually I tend to make my IDs to be GUIDs. And let's see, let's make these nullable to get rid of the warning, and also because, well, they could start off null. And the GUID, the ID, we're going to, let's see, do I want to make that nullable? I think I'm going to do GUID.empty. Yes. So we'll start off as empty. That means it's brand new if it's empty. And okay, so let's see, I can remove this stuff, save that, and we've got a to-do. So kind of what you would expect for a simple to-do. field, and well, let's say we'll have a list of to-dos up here. We'll need to add a reference, so our dependencies. So from here, we'll need to add a project reference to our entities, and then we will need to no, okay. Let's see. So we want to go to entities.models. So we're bringing this in so that we can see that we have our to-do items here. I'm going to start this off as null. As nullable, and then what do we want to have happen? Well, there are a collection of lifecycle events, and if you write override here, you'll see them. There's an on-initialized async, on-parameter set async, and on-after render async. And so these all trigger at different points. The parameters are usually the first ones that get set, and then I believe render, and then you get initialized. And you can handle these things. And these are the lifecycle events that occur to make the page when a request comes in. So we often override the on-initialized at the very beginning to get our page set up. So I'm going to override on initialize. You don't really have to call the base method unless you want to, but there's not really much that happens there. So there's nothing that happens there that requires you to have it unless you are overriding an already overridden page. So we'll say that what this does is it would go out to the database, and so we're just going to mock up a list of to do, and so ID is equal to good dot new good, and then title is equal to get groceries, description equals cereal, coffee, more coffee, and let's see what else we have. Complete is already defaulted to false, so I don't need to set that. And I'll just throw 3 of these in. We'll put an empty string in there just to make sure we have things looking okay. And so we've got a new list of to-do. We have 3 new to-dos. And what's it complain about? A semicolon is expected here. Yep. Okay. So how do we display those? Well, okay, so the neat thing about this is we're not going to have to use JavaScript on the front end coding. We will do everything with C#. And right now, this you can see is HTML. If we go into here, we will we can start writing C# code. So that @ is saying, hey, you're no longer doing HTML. Now we're doing C# code. And we will say for each var to do in to-dos. And then we can say, you know what, we're going to make this be an unordered list. And each one of these things will be a list item. And we will just display. Now, it recognizes, as soon as we start writing a tag, it recognizes, okay, we're back in HTML mode. To start writing C# again, we just put an @ and we say, I'm going to go to my to-do, and I want to get the title. And then maybe I'll put a dash. And as soon as we hit the space, it says, okay, now we're back in HTML mode because I don't see any code thing logically as code. And then I can go back into here and say to-do dot is or complete. And so this is just going to go through. On initialize, it's going to initialize this, and we're going to run this. Let's see if it works. So, okay. Yep, there we go. We have all of our things right now in a statically rendered page. So that looks great, but what if this is a long-running operation? And so I'm going to make this, so there's actually another method, and that's uninitialized async. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the async method. Not only that, but I'm going to say task.delay 5 seconds. Okay, should be no big deal. This is going to be called asynchronously. A new thread's going to be made. It's going to wait 5 seconds. And so this simulates going to the database and coming back. And we get a null reference exception. This is really common when you have to wait for something. Well, initially this then starts off as null. Now you could do all kinds of things to handle this, right? You could go in and you could set this up to some new list and it would be empty. But we can use the fact that it's null actually to make our UI and our user experience better. And the way we do that is we will put an if statement. And we'll just say if to-dos is equal to null, well, that must mean that it's still loading. I've been doing too much Python lately. Okay. And so here, we're just going to put a nice little paragraph tag, and we'll put loading. We could also get a GIF with one of those nice spinny things that drives everyone nuts. But we'll do this. And so what you can see is Now we are checking to see if this is null. If this is null, we're just going to say loading, and then as soon as it becomes available, it will display it. So let's do that. So I'm going to run it. And we'll go to to-dos. 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1000, 4, 1000, 5 seconds. Well, that wasn't great. We went to the site, and what happened? It took forever to get there. And then it finally showed up. So they provided something to handle that. So if you look up on Microsoft's documentation, look for stream rendering, they talk about it here. Essentially what it allows us to do is when we show the pieces we have right away, and then when it gets updated, show the update. And so right now we're in server static mode. And so right here we're going to add an attribute and let me get what it's. I haven't memorized all of these yet. So I'm going to set stream rendering to true. And let's see the difference. And you see there's our loading. 5 seconds goes by, and then it shows our stuff. So that kind of simulates if you have a long-running application, long-running data collection at the beginning, how you can show the page and then update it when it becomes available. So that's stream rendering. It's not really one of the render modes. If you see the term render mode, that's not listed here. That's something completely different. Let's say that we want to have a button on here. So I'm going to put a button. Eventually this will be an add button. So I'm going to put a button. Type is equal to button. And we'll have a method down here that we will run. Let's see. Well, we'll add that later. So button, and class is equal to btn primary, and we will say add to do. Make sure it looks okay. Okay, nice button. Let's see, while I'm at it, it's a good time to, in the nav menu, we'll add a button to get us there. And then we will add a method. So that's my onInitialized. And for now, I'm just going to put a we're going to say to-dos dot add new to-do title So we'll just add this to do just to see if we have interactivity. And let's run it and see what happens. Five seconds goes by, and I click Add to Do. You notice it was clicked. Nothing seems to be happening. Okay, well, let's put a stop point in here and run in debug mode and see if we can get there. Oh, you know what would make it easier and more valid test is maybe I should call it. So we'll say @on. Now notice the @ symbol here. If you put on click, that would be a JavaScript on click. If we want C# method to be called, we need to put the @on click, and then we can put in here the name of our method. So when we are dealing with C# code, which is in the browser, even though this is server side, we're still doing C# in the browser in a sense. I guess it's on the server, but yeah, the code we're writing to run in here is C#. We need to use the @on click because this is C# code that we're calling here. Not if you don't put the @on click, you will get it will say it couldn't find your method because it's looking for a JavaScript on that. That's a C# one, and it's purple like C#. Okay, so let's try this again. Go to the to-do. I probably can reduce that from 5 seconds. Yep, it's got it there. It's not going there. So your natural inclination at this point is, let's put a stop point. Let's bring this down to 500. So I've got a stop point here. Let's see if we can get it to go there. It's not executing. Well, the reason is because we are still in static server-side rendering mode. We need to add render mode, interactive, and you notice there's all different ones: interactive auto, interactive server, and we want interactive server. Because this is run on the server side, not on the client side, we would use interactive server. If we were putting our code down here, you see down here when we get into that, if our counter has interactive auto actually, we'll get into that, but if you're making a page down here and you want an interactive client side to be interactive WASM, we're using interactive server here because it's on the server side. So now that we have that, let's see what happens. Now you see that little flash there? That is another issue. But now you can see that it is in fact working. So I'll get rid of this stop point and show that now every time we click, it adds a to-do. Let me refresh it again. So there's this double click thing that's happening. And that's because there's also, in addition, there is some pre-rendering going on with this page. And so there's some more things that we need to do, but this kind of gives you an idea of the interactive mode. So that is how we make a page that has, so we looked at static server and interactive server. And so this is already an hour, so I'm going to stop here and probably make another video that goes into it in more depth and then gets into WebAssembly and auto. So that's all I've got for now. Thank you very much.